Yeah, I'll get us underway. So thank you everyone for joining today. A few of you may have been introduced to me on previous Change Chats. My name is Michael Graham and I'm a Senior Project Manager for Truman Change, and I will be hosting today's Change Chat. So I just want to officially welcome you to our February 2025 edition, which is actually our first of the year. If you haven't been to one of these before, the way that they work is we pick a particular topic, pull together an excellent panel like we have done today, and then we provide you with tips and expertise on that topic. We want and we like these sessions to be really informal, and we want to try and make them as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to either unmute yourself, put your hand up, or put a question in the chat, which I will be monitoring as we go through. These sessions are recorded. So everybody who has booked onto the session will receive a copy of the recording. So if you do for any reason have to unexpectedly leave, or you want to share it with anybody else, you will have the opportunity to do that afterwards. Also, the recording will be put on our YouTube page and our other social media channels. So before we get started, as I've said, today is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded and you do have a question, like I said, just put it in the chat. So today's session is on culture change in the public sector. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined by the founder and managing director of Truman Change, Lucy Truman. We've got our housing specialist, Justin Hunt, and we've got our associate consultant and friend of Truman Change, who specialises in policy, Rachel Walker. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we get on to the actual nitty-gritty of today, I wondered if you, all three of you, would like to introduce yourself. So Lucy, I will start with yourself if you want to introduce yourself to everyone here today.
Thank you, Michael. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. My name's Lucy Truman. I'm an organisational psychologist and the founder of Truman Change. So I specialise in culture and change and how we get organisations and people within them to change the way that they work. I'm full of a cold and keep having coughing fits. So if you see me suddenly mute myself, then I'm just trying to avoid coughing in your ears. But hopefully Rachel and Justin will jump in and rescue me if that does happen.
Justin, over to yourself.
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Justin Hunt. I have been working in social housing now for over 30 years. Started as a housing officer, went all the way up to director level, and have been working with Lucy and Truman Change for just over a year now. Yeah, most of my experience is in local government, but also housing associations. So thanks, Michael.
Rachel, finally.
Hi everybody, Rachel Walker, Associate Consultant at Truman Change. I've been working with Truman Change since 2021, and I'm here as a public policy and social policy specialist. My particular passion and interest in terms of local government culture is how we interact with our residents and how local government has really shifted over the last sort of 10 to 15 years from sort of proactive to reactive services and what we can do about that internally. I'm looking forward to today.
Excellent. Thank you all. So Lucy, the first question, I'm just going to come to yourself. Tap out if you, or tag somebody in if you're struggling. But please, can you explain why you've chosen culture change in the public sector as today's Change Chat topic?
Well, the honest answer to that, because we've done culture quite a few times, but every now and then we put a survey out and say, what would people like us to do a change chat about? And people keep saying culture. So I think it's something that is really popular and is really challenging for people. I think one of the reasons why it's challenging is it can sometimes feel like it's not very tangible, and it can be used, wielded around as, oh, we can't make this happen because culture, or people aren't doing what we want because culture, without necessarily the level of understanding of, okay, so what next? So what do we do about that? And sometimes people can feel a little bit like they are a victim of organisational culture rather than really being able to drive it. And the truth is, we can drive it and we can influence it. We go by the definition that culture is how messages move around the organisation. And when you think of it in that more tangible way, you are then more able to be more influential. You can't completely 100% control it, but you can definitely do more on purpose, rather than be in this place of, oh, the culture is bad, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to fix it. So it's a really popular topic, and it is one that I feel like even with clients we come back to all the time. My background professionally is project program management. My background academically is organisational psychology, and I think we've gone down a road of trying to drive change through this project and program management methodology, which you do need some structure. But I think now organisations are really wakening up to the fact that actually, if you do change from more of a cultural perspective and you actually target and drive culture change, a lot of the organisational change that you're trying to make happen will fall out of that and go a lot smoother and happen a lot more naturally. So it's just something really crucial. And even in the private sector, you know, you do hear people, I don't want to quote Stephen Bartlett, if I'm honest, but I'm pretty sure he said that like his number one job across his multiple companies is culture. So there's a lot of private sector organisations that are realising from a leadership perspective, if your leaders are well equipped to drive culture on purpose, not by accident, then that is the secret to success. That is what makes it work. So yeah, I just think it's really, really important, and I'm really happy that people keep voting for it to come back, because I think that tells me that that people outside of my geeky world that are really into change and psychology, people that are running services are also recognising it's a hugely, hugely important thing.
Great, thank you. You've kind of tied in a little bit with my second question there, so I'll ask Rachel this one. So it's a simple one for me to ask, but maybe not a simple one to explain. But how would you define culture?
Oh, Michael, you couldn't have given that to Lucy. I could have answered her question beautifully. No, I think culture is everything. It's behaviours, it's the clarity that we bring to our projects, it's the feeling that we have on a Sunday night about Monday mornings, it's how we talk about our work, it's the identity that we feel as workers within organisations. It's a lot more than slogans and posters and kind of mission statements. It's how your people feel and how you feel about your services. I've worked in organisations where I'm embarrassed to say that I work there, or I've changed my job title and lied a little bit. And said,
not was I hope, Rachel.
Oh, you know, when I was in local government, I was going, oh no, I just work in IT, and just because I knew that the outward perceptions of our organisation very much reflected the internal culture of what we were experiencing. And I think, you know, the culture is it's not unspoken, and like Lucy says, we can deliberately steer culture down difficult paths. You know, toxic cultures exist and they trickle down from the top just as much as positive cultures. But the culture really is when you're down and out and you've got multiple project deadlines and you've got no budget and you've got members asking for this, that and the other, and residents are up in arms. But culture is what keeps you going. Culture is the goodwill and the public sector, public services mindset that we all rely on for people to work in slightly lower paid jobs. You know, in the public sector, we are still not quite outstripping the private sector, but this is what we want. We want people to be able to work for their communities and to feel part of that. And that's what culture delivers. I think for local government now, it's a brilliant time to start some self-reflection. You know, we've got local government reorganisation on the horizon. We're coming out the back of a pandemic that really shifted our culture very, very quickly, rapidly, into one of, you know, emergency response and sort of a real collective energy. We've come out of that now, and now we're left with sort of the prospect of massive change. We're left with, you know, how are we going to expand our culture when we turn into a bigger council? What great aspects are we going to take? What terrible aspects are we going to leave behind? I think now is a brilliant time for that kind of organisational self-reflection as to what services might look like, and to recognise that really that begins and ends with your culture. It'll either kill you or it'll make you. So in terms of your question, Michael, what is culture? Oh, I don't know. It's everything and it's nothing. It's all things. It really is. It's what gets people up in the morning and sends them to work, or what gets them calling in sick when they're feeling just a little bit dodgy. You know, it's the difference between people wanting to do the work and people doing the work despite all of those other things. And it's probably more valuable than most leaders give credit for. And because one of the first things that people say is, oh, our culture's great. It's absolutely great. We're a really bonded team, but they're talking about their immediate colleagues and not the organisation as a whole. So I think it's a brilliant time to be having this discussion, and I don't think we should ever lose sight of culture being such a huge driver. Does that answer your question, your sneaky question there, Michael, about what is culture? Got a culture expert there.
Yes, that did answer my question, and I'm sorry to throw that on you straight away. Justin, I've just accidentally clicked your microphone and said it asked to unmute rather than my own, so I apologise with that. Lucy, Justin, coming on to yourself. So Lucy had made the expression of culture is how messages move around the organisation. What are your viewpoints and your perspectives of that, and what your experiences throughout your career?
So yeah, I'm happy to come in. So my experience is essentially, I agree with everything that Rachel and Lucy were saying about culture. It's about positivity or negativity. So you can go into organizations where you immediately sense some real positivity and organizations where there's some negativity. And as Rachel was saying, that can vary. So you can get teams where there's a lot of positivity and their colleagues in another team next door could be negative. Equally, you can have positivity within a team, but negativity within the organization. So it can have many different layers to it. I do think that within local government, that finance can be quite influential. The ability to be able to have a degree of flexibility relating to your budgets, decision making, the services that you're able to deliver, etc., can be very important, because otherwise, if money is very, very tight, then you find yourself regressing back into what represents the essentials, and sometimes a sort of siege mentality that can start to kick in, because you're just getting through the day and getting stuff done. So those are outside influences that can really impact on the culture. That said, I've experienced plenty of organizations and teams where they're subject to very tight budgets, but collectively they're able to turn that around and go, what is it that we're going to do in order to be able to make this function? And they're able to then stand out as being very cooperative, very positive, and still delivering some really good services. So, it can vary, but ultimately it is that difference between positivity and negativity.
Great, thank you, Lucy. Coming back to yourself, so we've talked on there about the how the good and bad areas of culture and what that kind of looks like. How can that affect results? How can bad culture affect the day-to-day running of an organisation?
So there is a real plethora of research out there about things like staff morale and how that improves productivity, levels of staff engagement, which means, how kind of emotionally involved and committed people are in their work and how that affects productivity and performance. There's lots of research around how relationships at work affect performance. So every instinct you've got about happy staff are productive staff is right and has been proven. So I think from a cultural point of view, what I find interesting is that, so we go by the definition of it's how messages are cascaded around the organisation. And we use that definition because it's practical and it enables you to identify, okay, so if we set up a really difficult, clunky IT system, and then we tell our staff that we actually want them to be really innovative, we are sending a contradictory message. So it enables you to distill it and be really practical. But what that means is that culture is, at its heart, how stuff is received by the staff member. So in order to understand it and understand how it's impacting performance and understand how it's impacting people's ability to do their work, you have to start with the staff and their perceptions and how they are receiving. But what a lot of organisations do when they're looking to tackle culture, because they don't necessarily understand that, they do things that are at a top down. So they do things like, well, let's come up with some new values, and we might engage with the staff on them, but if we put some posters on the wall, then that will change the culture. Posters on the wall on their own will have a tiny, if at all, any impact on how messages are received by those staff. So it's really about putting yourself in the shoes of the workforce, which can be very challenging to do. And actually, that's why sometimes using people like us helps, because it can be really hard to do that yourself because you're in your own shoes, so you're almost too involved. But put yourself in the staff's shoes and look at, okay, where is the messaging coming in And how is that enabling them to be able to do their job? So like the example of, if we're saying we want you to be really innovative and we want you to be fast paced and really productive, but at the same time, we've got 20 different IT systems that don't talk to each other and you're having to duplicate your efforts all the time. Now, it's stuff like that that people don't always associate with culture. But my argument is they are still sending a message. So even though some people think of culture as just behavior, actually all those other things, the way that you run a meeting sends a message, the way that you turn up to work sends a message, the way that you talk to people sends a message, the systems and processes that you put in, how things operate when you're doing a restructure sends a message. So it's about really distilling, do all those messages, say to that staff member, this is a place where there is psychological safety. This is a place where we value people. This is a place where we value performance, and we want to do well. So it's wider than just behaviour, I would say. But there is, as I said at the start, an awful lot of evidence out there from a psychology perspective that when people have psychological safety, when they feel supported, when they are engaged, when they have good morale, performance goes up. So if you want to talk numbers, happy staff do
Happy staff.
Numbers. Yeah.
We've had our first question, so Cheryl, I want to say thank you for sending that, and Justin has also commented and said that he agrees. Rachel, I'll bring this to you if we're going to go in order. I have found since home working has become more prevalent, culture is even harder to influence, particularly those who don't have a presence in the office. Any thoughts or tips? And if either of the other members of the panel want to jump in and add anything else, please feel free to do so as well.
I do have a lot of thoughts on this, actually. Being a predominantly home worker, I think the issue that we have here is it's not harder, it's just different. We look at developing real life office-based cultures, and that's what when we think about culture, that's what we think of. But take Truman Change, for example. We are a remote company. We get together frequently, but this isn't a in the office every day kind of experience. So instead of thinking, how can we shove this sort of real life model of culture into this dynamic and say, well, it's difficult to do this online, we think, how do we actually manage people online? How do we manage teams online? How do we build rapport, reliability? How do we send those messages working remotely? Whereas, we would have done them differently in real life. I think, like I say, so I've been talking to County Council this week quite a lot about their sort of in and out of the office working. And one of the big things is how difficult to manage a team, difficult to bond, difficult to do this. It's not actually, it's just different. We have to deploy different technology, different skills, different messages for our remote workers. Now, this remote technology and living on WhatsApp groups isn't alien to us anymore. You can build rapport, you can build relationships doing these things, and you can signal and send really strong messages. So, however, I do agree that, once we switch off the laptop, we're very much sort of left on our own device, and it could be quite a shock, isn't it? You sort of all of a sudden you're with lots of people and then you're on your own. And it's the culture that we develop through these mechanisms is when that laptop gets shut or the Teams call ends, your workers still feel part of that group despite where they are. It doesn't matter where they are. They should feel part of one organisation. So I don't think it's necessarily harder. I just think it's different, and we have to have a different outlet, different expectations of what that looks like when doing it remotely. Lucy, you've developed this brilliantly. I'm sort of tossing the ball to you, I guess.
So hybrid working, I would say three things. So the first thing is the jury is massively out. So when I mentioned all the research available about happy staff tend to be productive, the research is really, really mixed about home working. So you can find evidence that it improves well-being and flexibility, but you can also find evidence that it increases isolation. You can find evidence of where it increases productivity. You can find evidence of where it decreases it. So we don't know. So the jury is out. And I think that over the next 5 years or so, because research is there's always a bit of a lag. I think that more will come to light. It is really, really predominantly cultural. So, and I think I did a session actually with a council about 3 months ago, where we looked at increasing managers' maturity to be able to navigate this complex issue. Because when you're a manager in an organisation, and it's a hybrid organisation, you've got one person saying, well, I need to finish at 3 to take my kids to school. And you've got another person saying, well, customers expect us to be in. And you've got another person saying, well, we can't recruit because, there's not enough people in this local area. So we're going to have to offer it remotely. So you've got all these competing voices. And so we did a session where we looked at the research, which is why I know the research is not in a great place. And then we were able to say, right, so there isn't a clear-cut answer to this. So actually it's about skilling up managers with the ability to navigate all of these polar opposite tensions. What I will say is my research area is all about what happened during COVID from an organisational change perspective. And a big thing from my research that came out of how organisations made change happen so quickly during the pandemic was that although we were not in the same room as each other, barriers came down. So we suddenly started to see into each other's homes and to meet each other's pets and family. And we reduced some of the symbols of power of being sat in an office that, people have to enter. And a lot of that was stripped away and we all became a little bit more human. So I don't believe that it dehumanizes people if it's done well, but I think it's go back to the definition of it's about how messages are sent. So if you are working in a remote environment as a manager, you've got to think, okay, how do I communicate safety? How do I communicate a sense of team? How do I get those messages out in a way that lands remotely? And speaking for Truman Change, we operate on a type of work basis. So a lot of our work is done remotely. There is certain types of our work, like if we're running a staff event for a council, we will be on site. If we are running a workshop, we'll probably be on site. We have team away days every single quarter where we come together and we will go and do crazy golf together and we'll go out for meals together. Now, I know that's a lot easier to do in a small business in the private sector than it is in a large organisation. But we made conscious decisions about when do we need to be in a room together and when do we actually need peace and quiet at home and when can we do stuff like this where it's online. So it's think about the type of work and think about the message that you're sending. I feel like I've not necessarily answered that very clearly, but it is honestly a difficult area. And I'm really interested to see. It's something that a lot of research comes out that it's very clickbaity and it'll, say like, oh, people working from home are all isolated. And but then you can easily find another piece of research that says the opposite. So it's very mixed when you look at it overall. We don't know. We haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. A couple of things from me. When we went to play mini golf, Lucy won, so of course she was going to mention the fact we went to go and play mini golf. Also, it's worth saying that Lucy also wrote a paper about how we made change happen during the pandemic. We actually did a change chat about it in October. So for anybody that is interested in that, I'm just going to put the link into the chat now. So as part of that, you'll see the change chat and also you will see the paper itself. So we have had another question from Jill. What did the panel think in terms of what good looks like for resetting vision and values for a large organisation to support positive culture? And Justin, I'm going to come to you with that one.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. A couple of thoughts related to that. I think in terms of the previous discussion, there is often practical influences. So from a housing point of view, it's very operational, and you've got a huge number of staff who physically have to be in properties, around properties, etc., and seeing people on a face-to-face basis. In which case, that often influences the cultural decisions around the extent to which people are able to work from home. So those practical considerations can influence that side of it. In terms of the cultural side, I think the primary comment that I'd make on the vision and values is middle management. In a large organization, it can be very difficult for a chief exec, a director, etc., to be able to directly influence the middle managers. So often there's a huge amount of discussion around culture and change and messaging that happens with heads of service in a room. But the influence of middle managers, team leaders, etc., can be huge in terms of the way teams interact with each other and the messages that filter down. And so I feel that it's worth investing in ensuring that those middle managers are communicated and feel valued, because that changes the language away from we've decided and us, which is the positive one. If you don't invest in them, then you get the they, the them, and there's a finger pointing upwards, going, well, it's not me. I'm part of the team. This is happening to me as much as it is to you, and that's how they bond with the team, which it isn't the right way to develop leadership, etc., etc. But if they're not feeling invested in, if they're not feeling included, if they're not feeling listened to, then inevitably you're going to start to get that language starting to appear in what it is that they're communicating. So I think middle managers can be incredibly influential in terms of the frontline services, the culture of the organisation, and the messages that fly around. So investing in that cohort can make a huge difference, in my experience.
Rachel, I saw you nodding your head throughout all of that. Is there anything you want to add?
Yes, please. I think there's what good looks like. That there's so many. I mean, local government, and I'm going to say it again about reorganisation, we are about to reset massively. Some organisations more than others, but now's the right time to be asking these questions. I think what good looks like follows three things for me. It's one, it's co-design. You know, listen to your staff, listen to your service users. Don't presume to know which buzzwords will work. Ask your staff, ask them what culture looks like, ask them and get them, because not only will they feel, you know, more embedded in the culture, not only will they feel heard, but they'll feel ownership of the process and are a lot more likely to engage with it. The second point is around living those values. You can, you can implement a really wonderful cultural strategy, a values-based platform for all of your staff to come together. But if your leaders and your senior leaders are not visibly living by those values, it becomes a vehicle for cynicism and not for people to come together. So if one of your values is transparency, be transparent. Don't hide away in offices and behind meeting minutes. If it's, efficiency, be efficient. If it's lead, you know the kind of thing I'm talking about. Because as soon as we see contradiction or hypocrisy from the bottom up when it comes to these values, it can be more harmful than not. You know, culture can develop naturally, and you've probably got cultures and microcultures within your organization that are working beautifully. If you were to unpick them and expand and say, can we look at what we're doing well here and apply it to other areas, gets people involved. The third thing I would say is a bit of a cheeky one. Nouns, not adjectives, people. If we're going to look at values, that we're talking about actual nouns and not adjectives. So transparent isn't a value. Transparency is just a real bugbear on my part. If I see any more adjectives as values, I'm going to scream because they just don't work.
And that is why you're the policy specialist. We've had Lucy, anything for you?
I just come in on that because I think it's a really good question. And as Rachel said, we do a lot of work in local government. Local government is about to go through a huge reorganisation, and what's going to come out of that, this is my prediction, is there'll be new organisations set up, and then there will be a scramble for, we need a brand, we need a name, and this is going to take up everybody's energy for about 2 years. And it's going to be like a wedding where this is all like planned to the nth degree and takes over the family's life. And then actually the day after it happens, you're like, okay, we've actually got the rest of our lives now. And that's what local government reorganisation is going to be like. And there's going to be this huge scramble for, we need values and we need a vision. And so the first thing I want to say is your values and your vision won't actually make that much difference in terms of how people experience. So I wouldn't put a massive amount of energy into that and arguing over the, nuance between words. I do think that they need to be co-designed. I think that it's important to do the culture mapping piece of work before you set that vision and values, because you have to really understand what the culture is like now. And if I was working with a council that was about to merge with 3 other councils, I'd be doing that culture mapping in all 3 councils. And what I mean by culture mapping is it's that analysis of, okay, if culture is how messages are received around the organisation, then let's come up with a big long list of all the different messages that people are receiving. Because it's important that that vision relates to the reality of where people are. And if it's not where you want it to be, then the messaging becomes about describing what will be different. I think if you are just there saying, right, we're going to be collaborative, but then through that entire process of merging, you have not been collaborative. It's exactly like Rachel said, you have to avoid the hypocrisy. So I don't do a massive amount of work on vision and values because I tend to do the work of almost the more real work below it of, okay, so we've said this is the vision. Now let's test it. Now let's see if it's real. Let's see where it is real and where it isn't. And that's where the magic happens. What the actual values are on the wall is not where the magic happens. It's the make it real.
Great. We have got as well a future change chat about local government reorganisation in April sometime, but I'll put all the dates and everything towards the end. So, for that question, and we could probably touch on that more in the future. But we have had another question from Faye, so keep them coming. This is really good. Following the conversation on culture and impacts on performance, I would be curious to know what you believe are the most insightful leading metrics to measure if your culture is going in the right direction.
So, can I just say, I can't answer that question because you have to decide what your culture direction is. So I think you could easily measure some generic stuff, like there are measures out there around staff engagement, and you can do staff surveys. But actually, you need to define, and this is where I think that culture mapping piece is so important, because you need to define this is what we want our culture to be. And then you need to figure out, okay, so if we say that we want our culture to be innovative, where is it innovative and where is it not? So you kind of got to decide, this is what the culture, what I want it to be. In Truman Change, I want the culture to be very much around people being brave in their work, people being their best. So I always say to my team, you've only got your best asset is your brain. So how are you improving your brain all the time? So my question to myself would be, how would I measure that? Culture would be, well, are people investing in themselves? Are people going on training? Are people, up for taking on different types of projects? So you've the best metrics are, what is it real? So you could have a workforce of staff that are answering the staff survey saying, yeah, we're quite happy, but actually they're not doing the thing that you need them to do. So you've got to figure out, and if you want to put in, this is the culture I'm trying to build, then I'm perfectly happy to tell you what sort of things I think would indicate a culture of that type. But it's difficult to come up with your metrics without knowing what it is that you're trying to build, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Faye has commented. I'll come to you, Rachel, a second if you've got anything further. But Faye has commented and said, as soon as you mentioned cultural mapping, I have to say it got me thinking about the question I put forward. But Rachel, over to yourself.
I think I totally agree with Lucy, as I always do, because she talks but I think for local government and for government services in particular, there are metrics that you might not necessarily associate with culture. So it's in your staff absence levels. It's in the number of complaints that you receive from residents. It's in the turnover and retention that you have in particular teams. If one team or one department has got a massive turnover and others haven't and can't be explained by other factors, it's likely your culture is likely to underpin a lot of this. If you're getting a lot of complaints from residents about staff attitude, about, dropping the ball on just routine inquiries or housing inspections, or a lot of that will be underpinned in your culture. Turnover and retention, the take-up of learning and development, are staff invested in themselves as part of your organisation? Deadlines, are they missed? Are they kept? Do we have lots of grievances? All of these things, even just our service delivery metrics can be boosted or weighed down by your culture. If we are focusing on nothing but the budget, other things will slip, and that becomes a cultural sort of value within your organisation. If we focus on, presenteeism at all costs, your absence levels might go down, but your grievances might go up for other reasons. So there are metrics available to you that I don't think local government really thinks about them in terms of cultural influences. But I would definitely point to staff absences, public complaints, staff retention and turnover, and learning and development take up as really sort of red flags that there might be something in your culture that needs looking at.
Can I just bring in some of the work that we're doing? Justin and I are working together in a housing. It's within a local authority, but within their housing services. And what they're trying to do is build a culture where the team are more change ready, so people are more up for change. So the work that we've done there is getting people together, and we don't even talk about change. Like, they don't care about, I think most of them don't even know I'm into psychology, to be honest. We talk about, okay, how do we improve the repair service? And we get staff together to work on specific projects. So in terms of how would we measure that culture, so we do staff events and we do get feedback. So we're looking at the general stuff, but we're also looking at are staff actually driving change? So you see what I mean about making it super, super specific to, okay, if this is what it is, this is what we would measure. And I don't know if you want to come in on that, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really interesting piece of work. Because the organisation that we're referencing has been through quite a bit of change structurally. And so in a way, they've got a platform to go, what is going to be different as a result of this? And that presents an opportunity to start thinking through the way they want to do change, the way they want to deliver the services. And they have commissioned Truman Change in order to be able to do it, make sure that it is workforce led. And so there are three different sections to most housing services within local government, which is the repairs, the housing management, and the homelessness and housing options side. And so we're working with a group of staff in each of those parts of the business in order to be able to understand what it is that's not working, that is within their control to change. So it's very easy for a cohort of frontline staff to say, IT, restructure, finances, etc., none of which will be within their control. But when you separate those out and say, okay, but what is within your control, then all of a sudden a whole heap of stuff comes out, which is focused on what it is that's needed to be able to make a difference to the way they work, both within themselves and with other colleagues. And if you then start to put together a whole list of potential solutions to those issues, which they identify, and then support them to shape them up in relation to analysing it using data that's available, or looking at evidence in order to support what it is that they think will work, you then come out with some really, really good solutions. And if what you find at the end of the process is that they're the ones that now understand how change works and what it is that they need to do to change the teams and sections that they're working in. And that can be incredibly powerful. If you've done it across three different parts of the business, you've then got that happening in a coordinated way across the department. And you've then got a group of cultural change leaders who are frontline, who are going, we can make a difference. So, you have the opportunity to be able to change on an individual team basis, on a section basis, and on a department basis, if you invest in it and work through it. And it's not a huge piece of work, but yeah, people all of a sudden, at the end of the process, you point out that they are now leading change, and they go, I didn't realize, but yes, I guess I am.
Yeah. And without using words like culture or change or vision or values, we've just made it very, very real. But the impact of that, I think, will far outlive the impact of. So in their case, they were an ALMO that have come in-house. So they went through the whole, like, oh, we're now adopting the council's vision and values. And I think that the work that we've done on actually working with staff on practical basis will make a bigger difference than the vision and values.
Great.
I agree. Yeah. Sorry, Michael.
It's right. We've spent quite a bit of time obviously talking about initiating culture change within, but obviously that's one thing, but sustaining it is obviously very key as well. So what tips would you give to people listening and anybody you speak to about sustaining cultural transformation? And Rachel, I'll come to yourself with that.
So, I mean, I would go back to not to harp on about all parts. It's about living those values. It's about preventing the hypocrisy and actually, but it's being dynamic about it as well. We all know that cultures change over time. There are external influences, there are new internal influences, and recognizing that culture in particular moves all the time is really key to sustainable culture. If we're forcing ourselves to stick with what we think we ought to have as a culture rather than responding more naturally as an organisation as things develop. So take Lucy's research. Prior to COVID, local government was in a very different place culturally. The organisations I was working with were definitely in a very different place culturally. We then suddenly found ourselves in a new culture. We had new partners, we had new ways of working, we had new shorthand, new ways of receiving and giving messages. We're about to enter another one in terms of reorg, but also we're coming out of the pandemic and this is the new normal. So, cultures move, and it's not about necessarily producing new posters once every 3 years or anything like that. It's about recognizing that we do need to tweak what we consider to be our culture. How does technology influence it? How does global economics influence it? How do our people and our residents feel? How do they influence it? So there are many, many influences that create a culture. Recognizing that it is not static is probably, I think, one of the best sort of mindsets to be in if you want a sustainable organizational culture.
Yeah, and I always say to people, you are driving the culture and influencing the culture all day, every day, whether it's on purpose or not. And I think that leaders need to get into that headspace where this isn't a culture change. This isn't this is your day job. It's your day job. And every single day, all of your actions are sending something out. All of the decisions you make are sending something out. And how is that impacting the culture? So, and I think that's why the private sector leaders are cottoning onto that and now saying it's a core skill for leadership is the ability to read and understand culture and shape it and influence it, because it's literally your job. If you're a leader, that is the main part of your job, I think. And I think it's difficult in the public sector because we're not measured on that. We're measured on widgets, and to some degree that is true in the private sector as well. But I think really embodying how have you, and that, that's a challenge for all of you to think about now. What have you done today that has impacted? How have you impacted your culture today? What have you done? And you might have done something by accident. Like some days I might come to work not feeling very well because I'm full of a cold, not very prepared. What message is that sending to my staff? What message is it sending to my clients? What message is it sending to the people that I work with? And that's not to beat anybody up for being ill, because sometimes that can be a message of authenticity. But every decision that you make, how you structure your day, all of that is sending stuff out. So I think we need to, yes, there will be times when we suddenly need to redivert the culture and invest quite a bit in it. And the example that Justin and I talked about, that was a significant event. Bringing an organisation in-house is a significant event that means a lot of attention on culture. But those leaders that we've trained up in, actually, this is how you do change, they will be using those skills constantly as they go forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, us as an organisation, Truman Change, we're here now. We're obviously delivering this. How can we help? How can we support? What do we have available that people can tap into if they need to? Lucy, I'll come back to you for that one.
So we do culture mapping on organisations. Where we go in and our culture mapping process is based on a combination of the work of Taylor, but also Edgar Schein. And if you're really interested in getting geeky about culture, I would say absolutely read up on Edgar Schein. He was like the godfather of culture, academically speaking. And basically, that is the art of making it more tangible. So what are the messages telling us? What stories are being told around an organisation? And Edgar Schein called them artifacts, where there's different types of artifacts. And it can be how meetings are run. It can be the posters on the wall. It can be the behaviour, but it can be your decision-making processes. I mean, honestly, if I ask the question of a group of staff, how do you get a decision made? That tells me a phenomenal amount of about the culture of an organisation. So looking at those very real practical things, and we tend to do that in a workshop space. We then do something called a thematic analysis on it, which draws out, okay, so what are the repeated patterns that we're hearing? Because we'll do it over multiple workshops. And then we look at that from the psychology lens of, okay, what does this indicate? What is this telling us? But what it provides people with is then a very tangible list of, here are your contradictory messages. So if this is where you're going as an organisation, if you're trying to be more fast-paced or more innovative, or maybe you're trying to be more, so again, in housing, we're working with a housing organisation in Scotland at the moment who is trying to build a culture that's more resident engagement focused. So whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, we can then identify, well, this is where you're actually saying the opposite. And a really good example that I always come back to with this, because it was such a funny example, was a council which wanted their managers to be less siloed and more focused on collaboration. They wanted to reduce things like empire building behaviour. When we did the culture mapping exercise, we found out that the manager perspective was, yeah, but when we have our jobs evaluated and we've all been through restructures and had our jobs reevaluated, we actually get more points for how many people we manage. So they were literally paying people to empire build and then saying, we don't want you to empire build. And it's funny because, like, I bet all of us have got these blind spots of a decision that was made about one thing once upon a time, and now we're trying to, and we've not connected those two. So the magic really is in connecting them, and we can then provide you with a proper action plan of, fix these things and your culture will move in this direction. And it then turns it away from this sort of fluffy, magical pink fairy dust in the air that nobody has any control over, into a real, okay, we've got an action plan here and this is how we put our money where our mouth is. And that is in effect what we did with the housing service that me and Justin were talking about. The culture mapping came back. People are just waiting for restructures, they're a victim of change, there's not enough empowerment. Okay, so how do we create empowerment? And then we got very practical and got people changing small things about their services that actually have added up to significant financial savings. So it's about really tailoring it. It's not about saying we want our culture to be transparent. It's about then go and find the evidence of where it's not and fix it. I think that's definitely where we can help.
Justin, we're going to come in then.
I was just going to say, and in terms of the example that Lucy's quoting, what we've come away with is a group of people who are now using very different language. So rather than feeling as though everything was happening to them, then they now feel as though they're the ones that are able to take decisions and impact on the challenges that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So we started the process with what are the challenges, and there was a lot of stuff that they got off their chest. We finished it with them going, yeah, if I do all of these things and they're all within my control, then my working environment will be so much better. And that had nothing to do with all the other stuff that is happening on an organizational wide basis. So that makes people feel a lot better about themselves and about their workspace.
Right. Coming to you, Rachel, Lucy and Justin have just given some really good examples there of where they've seen change, culture change within an organisation and a couple of organisations. Have you got any examples that what we hear from these is that people love the examples? So have you got any examples that you'd share that people could relate to?
Yeah. Okay. So I worked with an organisation, a council, where visibility was one of their, leaders needed to lead, leaders needed to be visible. No one could pick the chief exec out of a lineup. In fact, they were misidentified a couple of times, and it's a really great example of closed door management, where we want visible leadership. We want, to be out amongst our staff and to feel really good about ourselves as managers and leaders. But the culture very much was close the door, do the work, 9 to 5, come and go almost discreetly, in and out of the building so that you don't get bothered by people. A real massive amount of hypocrisy. But one of the things that we did at Truman Change was we give leaders sort of that critical friendship. When we've done culture mapping, my favourite bit of culture mapping is reflecting it back to management and leadership and saying, this is what your staff are telling us. We quantify it, we sense check it, we make sure they're not telling us a big pack of nonsense, and they never are. But we have the ability to reflect back the truth of the culture of an organisation. And where leaders know that there is an issue, it's very welcome. Where many sort of leaders think, well, culture's fine. It's one of those fluffy things like this, because pink dust, it's fine. It's the budget I'm bothered about. When we reflect back to them, that's where the real change happens, because I can see it in their faces where they go like, oh, there's like the penny drops moment that they realize just how impactful and important culture is, where we're able to reflect it back to them as neutral partners, and we're able to give their staff the reassurance that their voices are going to be heard. It's massively, massively important. But like I said, my favorite one was, yes, but we're all very, very visible. And I was like, they literally don't know what you look like. They do not know your name. It's bonkers. You know, you're supposed to be leading this organisation. Probably the most important job in your borough is the chief exec of your local council, and people don't know who they are. Madness.
Yeah,
I also think Rachel's working on a piece at the moment that I've quite enjoyed. So Rachel's doing the analysis. I've done the culture mapping on it. Which is exploring, and this is something that will probably feel familiar to a lot of people, that tension between the corporate centre and service delivery. And there's a lot of really interesting cultural stuff there, because your corporate centre, and there is a video on our website actually about cats and cheese with one of my cats in. So it's definitely worth a watch because he's beautiful. There is a lot of research around, I think it's called reward sensitivity theory, but I always think of it as cats and cheese. And it's because people have individual differences in terms of how sensitive they are to risk or reward. And we're seeing that play out massively in a current client where we're looking at that relationship between the corporate centre and the service deliveries. Because what happens is your corporate centre is fundamentally about reducing risk. And that's because they are keeping you safe, making sure that, you know, we don't get sued by employment law, making sure that we don't break procurement rules, making sure we don't end up statutorily, like, you know, breaking our budget kind of thing. But then you've got people in regen that are like, let's go do something exciting over here. So you've got this real tension. And I think that's quite a good example of something that is worth exploring from a cultural perspective. The reason I've just realized I didn't even explain why it's called cats and cheese is because they did this research experimenting on rats and mice where they exposed them to the scent of cats and cheese. And then they measured, well, how did that impact their motivation? And basically cats, some of them are very sensitive to the smell of cats, so that makes them react. Some are very sensitive to the smell of cheese, that makes them react. Some are very sensitive to both, and some are not sensitive to either. And this plays out in humans as well, and they can measure it, although they don't use cats and cheese, they use like a personality profiling. But when you start looking at organizational culture from that perspective of, okay, what actually motivates people, you see that play out a lot in a lot of organizations where you have some parts of the organization that are, no, we must stay safe, and some parts of the organization that are, no, we must go out and chase cheese. And that tension, which to some degree is a healthy tension, because you would hope that you get that right by having both around the table, but sometimes it skews too far one way and becomes reckless, or too far the other way and becomes completely risk averse. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting example of how we've looked at culture in an organisation, Rachel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to cap it off, the approach to risk is massively culturally influential, whether that's personal risk and putting yourself out there as a leader, whether that's financial risk and what you're willing to sort of experiment with and fail well. It's sort of change risk, it's statutory risk, it's compliance risk. To what extent are we comfortable, and to what extent do we trust? Because risk turns into trust. So do we trust our staff to absorb risk, to understand risk, to take responsibility for these things? Or do we remove all of that because we're so risk averse, we're terrified of them making any decisions? So it all gets taken right up at the top, and we end up inadvertently disempowering our staff and undermining our leaders. Risk is a huge area, but it's one where we do see a lot of contradiction.
Great. Well, we're just coming to our last 5 minutes, so I'll just come to, I don't think I'll get through to all three of you, but I'll come to you first, Justin. If people had one takeaway to take from this session about culture, I always like to finish with this question. What would that be? And you've got to summarize that 55 minutes in about a minute.
Yeah, workforce-led change is the only way, in my experience, of ensuring that it becomes embedded. Everything else is short-term change, which needs to be revisited too often, and then you get cynicism being baked into the organisation. So yeah, it absolutely it's worth doing it in that right and thorough way, and make it workforce-led.
Great stuff. Anything else from Lucia or Rachel before I conclude?
Nouns, not adjectives. It's a
No,
cheeky one, but please, nouns, not adjectives.
Lucy?
Well, for me, it's just make it really real and practical. Like don't talk about things like transparency. Talk about how are we transparent. Don't talk about are we ready for change. Actually get people working on a change. So make it very, very real and practical.
Yeah, great. While Lucy was talking as well before, I did put the link into the cats and cheese video, and I'm sure Rachel will do one about nouns, not adjectives very soon. So I just want to say thank you very much to the panel for today. I thought it was a really interesting session and sharing their expertise and experience. And I just want to say thank you as well to everybody for joining. So before we finish, I just wanted to give you some dates for your diary. So we have got 3 change chats currently in the diary. With 14th of March, we've got a housing sector change chat. The 14th of April, we have our local government reorganisations chat. And the 23rd of May, we have an organisational psychology and public services change chat. I am going to put a link into the chat now, which is where people can book on if they like. Also within there, I have put our change readiness report, which is on our website. If anybody hasn't seen that before, it'll take you about 10-15 minutes if that to complete, ask you some questions, and it will give you back a report on what change looks like within your organisation. So finally, as I've said, we have the additional change chats coming up. We also have the previous ones on our website, which cover topics such as comms and engagement, housing, service reviews, and the household support fund, which is probably a bit outdated now. But we also, for the next steps, you will all receive an email, everybody who has attended, which will have the recording. Please feel free to share that with anybody that you like. And then if you would like to have a conversation with either Lucy, myself, Rachel, or Justin, please feel free to drop us an email and you can do so. So if there's nothing else from our panel, just want to say thank you. Oh, Lucy, sorry.
So we are just about to launch a sister company, which is called Reimagine Events. The website is live but hasn't been proofread yet, so I'm not going to share the link with you. But we are going to be running events that help people to basically progress change. So we can run bespoke events where we can come to your organisation and work with you on a particular change and help you to progress it. It's a one-day event for I don't know, maybe up to 100 people, or we are hosting one which is called Reimagine Local Government on the 24th of June this year in Manchester. So if you are interested in knowing more about those, if you just drop your email address in the chat, or you can send it to me privately if you want to, or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will send you the website as soon as it is launched. It is published, but it has a few errors on it at the moment. But yeah, we really want to get into that space where we are helping people to think through their own change, whether it's from a culture or service redesign perspective.
Right. So I will, if there's nothing from anybody else, I will say thank you once again to the panel. Thank you for everybody to join in, and have a lovely weekend, and happy Valentine's Day, everybody, to those that celebrate. Thanks, everyone.